Welcome, welcome. We're honored to have all of you here today in what is our new beautiful Student Life building. In case this is your first time here, it's a facility that was built to enhance the quality of life for our students, particularly having some large spaces for our students to be able to sit and enjoy themselves. And so we're delighted you could come and join with us. And this is the first time that we have held one of our Chancellor's lectureships here. And so I welcome you to this afternoon's installment of the 2005-2006 Chancellor's Lecture Series. This afternoon, I had the privilege of introducing to you Peter Eisenman. Peter Eisenman has designed everything from inventive private residences to large-scale housing and urban design projects to innovative facilities for educational institutions to an NFL stadium. He is the founder of Eisenman Architects based in New York and of the international think tank, the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies in New York, which he directed until 1982. He is the first Erwin S. Shannon Distinguished Professor of Architecture at the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art. He currently holds visiting professorships at Princeton and Yale. If we had an architecture place, you'd have one here too, I can assure you. His numerous essays on architecture have been printed in journals throughout the world. He has co-authored a book with Jacques Derrida. His recent book of selected writings, Eisenman, Inside Out, was published last year by Yale University Press. Peter Eisenman has been recognized by the American Institute of Architects with its National Honor Award in Design for the Koizumi Sangyo Corporation headquarters building in Tokyo. He's been recognized for his design of the Wexner Center for the Visual Arts and Fine Arts Library at Ohio State, my old stomping grounds, and where Peter and I first came together, as a matter of fact. He has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, the American Academy of Arts and Letters Arnold Bruner Prize, and a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. At the International Architecture Biennial in Venice in 2004, he was awarded the Golden Lion for Lifetime Achievement. Peter Eisenman has surely had enough recognition and accomplishments for an entire career. His most recent retrospective, Barefoot on White-Hot Walls, was held last year in Vienna, but he continues to design and to manifest his vision. His current projects include the 750,000 square foot City of Culture of Galicia and Santiago de Compostela, Spain, a cultural complex that includes 2 museums, 2 libraries, and an opera house, and the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin, which was dedicated May 10th of this year, and which Peter, Constance, and I had an opportunity to visit. And, of course, he is designing the 68,000 person stadium for the Arizona Cardinals in Phoenix. The Chancellor's Lecture Series seeks to bring to the attention of Vanderbilt and the Nashville community the work of women and men who shape our world. Architects like Peter Eisenman quite literally do shape our world by giving shape to physical space. And through doing so, they also shape our mental world by how they choose to guide our mind's eye. Architecture sets parameters on consciousness by holding the mind to certain capabilities of apprehension. Architecture both reflects and shapes how we perceive ourselves and our communities. Several months ago, the New York Times published a feature on how different athletic stadiums are both community centers and visible, legible signs of community's sense of itself. Any architect who can take on the responsibility of creating an NFL stadium has chops indeed. Architecture does matter, and probably more than we know. And I do hope that you will join us for further conversation following Peter Eisenman's talk. Please do come to the reception that will be held in the Board of Trust room, which is right around the corner. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly my honor, my privilege, my pleasure to introduce Peter Eisenman, one of this nation's, indeed one of this world's great architects. And I will also say, for those of you who don't know this, Peter Eisenman is a great football fan. We had an opportunity to have Peter and Cynthia join us when we were at the Rose Bowl, as a matter of fact. And Peter is coming tomorrow to bring us victory against those Richmond Spiders. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Eisenman.
First of all, I'm here to do my Gordon Gee imitation, but I left my bow tie and my jacket because it's a little warm, and I asked Gordon if it was all right, because that's one of the reasons I'm here. I can't tell who was the first one to wear bow ties, Gordon or myself, but since I'm older than he is, I like to think it was moi. honestly, the second reason why I'm here is to see a football game. As Gordon has rightly said, I am a football nut, and my wife and myself, go to 15 football games a year, so I am challenged by seeing a Southeast Conference game, or what purports to be a Southeast Conference game. I usually spend my time in Knoxville, Gordon, so, but I don't want to say anything about that. I know it's, they have an architecture school there, so. So the first reason I think I'm here is I'm a bow tie guy. The second reason I'm here is I'm a football fan, and I'm also trying to enroll my son at Vanderbilt. So that those are the three ostensible reasons. The rest of it really doesn't matter. I didn't know what to do, because this is clearly a varied audience, and there are some people here, architect friends of mine, who want to hear something about architecture. There are other people here who want to hear about the Holocaust Project. And so what I'm going to do is combine a couple of things. First, to talk about where architecture is and what the issues are, I think, in architecture today. And then I'm going to talk about our Holocaust project in Berlin, because it clearly represents some of the real issues that architecture faces. And so I want to go back and start this lecture in about 1914. And this is just prior to World War I. And the world was, I think, changing at the time. And there was, in the arts, in literature, in philosophy, and also in architecture, what could be called a paradigm shift. That is, a movement from one sensibility to another. And from about 1914 to 1939, the advent of the Second World War, 25 years, there was what would be called modern architecture. Now, the interesting thing about modern architecture, it promised a social revolution. It was a revolutionary architecture that said our cities are not good places to live in, that our buildings are looking toward the past rather than to the future, and there needs to be a new social order that architecture will represent. This is very similar, this paradigm shift that occurred in 1914, to the same shift that occurred in 1789 with the French Revolution, when there was a whole new social order, when the client for architecture was no longer a pope or a bishop or a duke, but was a public. So that the worlds that change in political sense also find a new architectural expression. And the architecture from the French Revolution was a very radical change from what had previously happened. The thing that's important that ties 1789 to today was that 1789 was ushered in by terror and destruction, the storming of the Bastille, etc. And I would like to think, as I wend my way to 2001, that the period that we are in now, the paradigmatic shift, occurred after 9/11 in 2001. That is, terror and destruction again brought about, for me, such a shift. Anyway, we go back to 1914 to 39, we have modern architecture. And in 39, with the advent of the Second World War, the whole social program of modernism in literature, in music, in arts, in culture in general, was seen to be a failure. It did not provide for this new world. After the war, and especially after the Holocaust and Hiroshima. And of course, my lecture then ties back to the Holocaust. People said, we can no longer speak the same language. We can no longer speak of architecture and social purpose and social revolution. And so what happened was that the forms of modern architecture, which you see all over Nashville and any city in the United States, came from what had originally been an idea of a good society to a good life. The whole notion that corporate America, after World War II, needed to adapt new forms and new ideas to make itself more responsive to a burgeoning public. And so the forms of modernism were taken without the social program and brought into corporate America. And it's often said about some place like Chicago that it is Hamilton by day and Jefferson by night. That is a reasonable downtown and a suburban individualistic series of suburbs. And so this country has always been riven by the struggle between Hamilton and Jefferson, the downtowns being modern, the suburbs being individualistic. And so modern architecture took hold only in a watered-down version. Then what happened was another, what I would call, the shift to modern architecture from the good society to the good life was not a paradigmatic shift. But in '68, I believe there was another paradigmatic shift in sensibility, and that was caused in Europe and the United States by the student riots and the riots in the ghettos. And it came about, I believe, out of a certain frustration with the fact that we fought 2 world wars. We were supposed to have changed the political and social structure of the world, and everything was more or less the same. And what had happened was that the blacks that had moved from the agricultural world of the South moved to the ghettos of the North between 45 and 68 and found that the situation was the same, if not worse, than they had left. And so we witnessed, not only in Los Angeles, New York, Newark, New Jersey, where I was born, an implosive condition where the blacks in these cities and the students in the universities didn't struggle against something outward, they struggled inward. They destroyed their own well-being, whatever that would have been. The students occupied the university, they barricaded the streets in Paris, and there was clearly a sensibility that had changed. And that change was a very different change than had happened in the world before. And I recall going to Korea as a second lieutenant in '55, and we were still dancing to Patti Page and the Tennessee Waltz, although I realize it was 4 or 5 years earlier for those of you who are going to hold me to dates. But when I came back, we were Bill Haley and rock and roll. And I can remember in the East in '57 and '58, they had what were known at Princeton and Yale as the, well, at Yale anyway, the Humpty-Dumpty ice cream riots. And what happened at Yale was there was a sort of an entrepreneur called the Humpty-Dumpty ice cream man, and he would park at a certain place on Chapel Street every day and sell ice cream. And one day, the Good Humor Man, which was a corporate ice cream truck, took the Humpty-Dumpty truck's place on Chapel Street. And the kids came running out of their dorms, fueled by rock around the clock, and they came and they tipped over the Good Humor truck. All right? But this is where the anarchism takes place. They then didn't have enough fun tipping over the Good Humor truck. They tipped over the Humpty-Dumpty truck as well. So here we were in a new situation. that people were motivated to change things for change itself. There was no social program, no political agenda. They just wanted to knock things over. And the same thing happened at Princeton in '57 when the students, one day in April, Bill Haley was playing on a loudspeaker. The kids got agitated. They went out, and there's this little train that runs into Princeton. They tipped over the dinky train. So for the sake of finding something to tip over. To me, that energy signaled an idea, a program of change for change's sake, not for any kind of political or social agenda as occurred in 1789 or even in 1914. So by the late 50s and early 60s, change had been a kind of credo, but there was nothing to struggle against. And so you have this implosive condition that occurs in 1968, and we have the beginning in many of the cultural disciplines of postmodernism. Now, what's interesting is that the books that fueled postmodernism for architects, like Robert Venturi's Complexity and Contradiction, Aldo Rossi's The Architecture of the City, Manfredo Tafuri's Theories in History, all came out between '66 and '68, the same time that Jacques Derrida's seminal work of Grammatology came out, and also Guy Debord's The Society of the Spectacle. Now, both of these books play an important role in the next generation of architecture. So that we have a movement that congeals around 1968 in many of the disciplines and takes the form of a kind of freewheeling experimentation that has no social purpose. I mean, I have friends now, architects that will remain nameless, that struggle over who is going to do the new scent for Prada. And it was just announced the other day that my friend Frank Gehry is doing the new line of Tiffany, whatever. So you realize that architects have now become social figures. They have become media figures. Architecture has become mediated, and architects are doing things now that have nothing to do with the basic understanding of any kind of social or political program in architecture. Another revolution that's probably more subtle to you from the outside, but something that is important inside architecture, is that we have moved from the mechanical paradigm to the electronic paradigm. That so much so is clear. I gave this example the other night at a talk I gave at Cornell. A couple of weeks ago, my 14-year-old son and myself, we had tickets to go to see, box seats to go to see the Yankees play at Yankee Stadium. And we go because we're Yankee haters, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, I suppose everybody in the South are Yankee haters. So in any case, we had beautiful seats. And I said, "Hey, Sam, we got tickets to go to see the Yankees tonight." And he said, "Oh, no, I've got my fantasy draft. I can't go." And I thought, oh, my God. Here, media had taken over from reality, and media had become reality because the fantasy draft, which isn't much fantasy at all, had sort of taken his attention for 2.5 hours. I notice this more and more with my students. Architecture students today don't want to draw. I was at Yale yesterday, and we had an hour-long discussion because they said, "Oh, it's difficult to draw. Let us use a computer." And you know, if you can't draw, it's like a writer that can't write. I think you learn to draw by drawing, not from a computer. But in any case, what has happened for architecture is very symbolic, and that is, in what I would call the mechanical paradigm, one had to show the truth of structure. In other words, if there were things holding a building up, you wanted to see how the forces of gravity were resisted by architecture in a kind of literal mechanical way. Now that the mechanical paradigm is no longer of any value to anybody, we don't need to show how buildings stand up. And so you get the wildest kinds of forms. If any of you have seen any of the latest things, for example, Santiago Calatrava's terminal in New York City, which looks like a flying bird, and you say to yourself, why does a terminal have to look like a flying bird? And then somebody says, well, it's structural. Well, it isn't. It's all sugar-coated things that are made to look like structure, but it has nothing to do with literal structure, and they're spending $2 billion on this cake in any case. In other words, there has been a loss of integrity in a certain way as to how architecture portrays itself in the society. And I have always argued that the culture, one of the ways that one can understand culture and where it is through its architecture. For example, at Princeton University, you can measure the changing climate of relationships in the evolution of Princeton through which buildings are towers. At Princeton, the first tower was the chapel, and it stayed that way probably for 30 or 40 years until after the war. The second tower was the library, and it started to shift from the sacred to the secular as Princeton became more and more a secular institution, even admitting women. And the third tower at Princeton was the administration building, which was another sign of the movement of the times, the burgeoning of administration and management in our educational process. And the fourth tower was the math science tower, showing the movement toward the sciences at the liberal universities. So the evolution of Princeton, and you could say this about Harvard, about Yale, about most institutions, can be traced through the architecture. And the same thing at the Cambridge colleges. You can see how the University of Cambridge transformed itself from a series of cloistered religious entities to a major university in England. And I happen to be familiar both with Cambridge, Princeton, and these other places to be able to speak to them, but I'm certain the thing would hold in most cases. So that now we are no longer, as architects, tied to a mechanical necessity. We don't have to show how we build things. And it was first articulated by an architect named Alberti in the 15th century when he wrote that architecture doesn't merely have to stand up, it has to look like it stands up. And that paradigm of looking like it stands up had been something that architecture was about for 400 or 500 years. Now, I believe that 9/11 abruptly changed the conditions of the culture around the world and also the conditions of the culture of architecture. Mark Danner, in a recent article in the New York Times Sunday Magazine section, said that the terrorists were about terror and spectacle. That's what they wanted. And I've always believed that the planes were calibrated to come a half an hour apart, precisely so that after the first tower was hit, the whole world would be watching on CNN, which they were, watching the second tower be hit. Now, I believe those images, those spectacular images of media, have brought an end to what I call postmodernism, but was also the end of what could be called the society of the spectacle. And this brings up Guy Debord's book, The Society of the Spectacle, where he said that what is happening slowly, that is eroding the civility and culture of the Western world, is the fact that we're being turned into spectators. that gradually we are standing by and watching things rather than participating in things. And I think this was brought home very clearly to me being in New York the day that those planes attacked the World Trade Center. Because my friends in Rome, in Munich, in Berlin, etc., watched on TV, but I was there physically. We lived below 14th Street. We were cooking, and the last building that went down, number 7, we were watching, standing there, and turned away, and the next thing we know, it was gone. And the dust, the dirt, the chaos, the smell, we were in a war zone below 14th Street like America hadn't experienced since the Civil War. I think it was the most deaths in one day since the Battle of Antietam Creek, but you all know more about that than I do, but I believe that's true. So it was over 140 years that Americans had not died at that rate in one day. What it meant for architecture is very important because it changed the idea of what it meant to be there. In other words, being there suddenly became important, not watching something happen, but being where it happened. And architecture has always been about being there. And I think the important issue is, can architecture come back to a situation where we're no longer attempting to be media darlings and produce images that conflict with media, but in fact, or try and compete against media, but in fact attempt to produce spaces that cause people to be somewhere and feel that they're there. Now, I go of necessity to a gym 3 mornings a week, and I get on a treadmill and I run around there for a half an hour, 45 minutes, because I'm so sedentary all of my life. Many of you go to gyms. There's the increase in gyms, but people are, going into hiking more, camping more, extreme sports, all kinds of things to exercise, exorcise the sedentary nature of our bodies. Architecture has been the one discipline that combines the mind, the eye, and the body, unlike any other, because it produces spaces that are important to the body, the mind, and the eye. And what we're seeing now is a return to thinking about place and being there. And we're thinking about place and being there in relationship to a social constituency. You cannot make place for an individual. You cannot make places of assembly, etc., unless you're talking about a political will. And so we're working mainly in Europe on these projects. The Holocaust Memorial was the creation of place of memory. But it was a public place done with public will, and I will talk about that later. We're doing a 6-building, as Gordon said, City of Culture in Santiago de Compostela in Spain, which has been traditionally a place of pilgrims. 8 million pilgrims visited Santiago. It's one of the 3 important Catholic pilgrimage sites. Trying to change the structure from the religious to the secular and the religious. And so we're doing an opera house, museums, libraries, etc., to talk about contemporary culture, to make place for people to gather. The most important, I think, or not the most important so much, it's the most differentiated, is the fact that the Arizona Cardinals hired an architect of, like myself, as opposed to a stadium architect, to give them a sense of place in the desert. And, what we've done convention centers, which are places of public assembly and places of commerce. and now stadia have become the next kind of place where civic identity and civic icons have become important. We've done 3 or 4 more stadia in Europe. We did the German Olympic Stadium bid in Leipzig. And the reason for this is that people begin to identify stadia as they did the public library in the past, or the courthouse in the past, or the town square in the past. Stadia, convention centers, museums, etc. And we went through an era, I think, in the 70s where it was museums. In the 80s and 90s, it was convention centers, and now it's stadia. I mean, we were even in a competition in Tulsa, Oklahoma, for an indoor facility for 20,000 people, where they don't even have a team. They just wanted an architected indoor facility. And so what you realize is that the importance of civic pride and icons that represent the city have become crucially important. And you also realize that the icons that were built that were not icons, the stadiums that were built after the war, are all being torn down and replaced with new icons that represent more the spirit of a place rather than necessarily playing ball. And if you go to, for example, Bank One Ballpark, which I go to in Phoenix, right next to where we're building, you realize that people go there in the summer because it's the coolest place to be, where you can get a hell of a lot of people, and you've got all the facilities of a mall when you don't have to be outside. You've got shops and restaurants and people sit, and even pools in the Bank One Ballpark. So it is a family place where people gather in the summertime. And I go there because, not to watch baseball, but to be in a cool place other than my small little hotel room or my car. And so you realize that stadia have become very important. I gave a talk in Istanbul in Turkey about 2 months ago at an international conference. What amazed me was my audience was 2,500 Muslims, all right? And I happen to be a New York Jew, which is irrelevant in this context, but still. And I got a standing ovation from the 2,500 Muslims. And I thought, and I was mobbed afterward with people in burqas and things to take photographs with them. They were going back. 300 students had come from Iran, our natural supposed enemy, right? And these kids were saying, hey, we want you to come to Iran. I said, what are you going to do, string me up? I mean, you know, I said, well, you know, how are you going to get me back out? And they had come 2 days in buses across Turkey to hear my lecture. And I was really stunned by this. And I began to realize that something was really off in the political process. That if I could have 2,500 Muslims give me a standing ovation and want to have pictures and take them back to Iran with me, that something didn't square with what I was reading in the newspapers. And I said at the time, I met with the mayor of Turkey, I mean, not Turkey, but it might have well been Turkey, Istanbul, which is, I think, 16 million. And he said to me, Peter, what should we do? And I said, listen, I have a great idea for you. You guys are trying to get the European Championship for 2008. And I said, you know what I would do? I said, I would build a series of new stadia financed by the government, because I believe that it's one way to get to the Arab street, is through football. And if we could build stadia that are places where these people can have an expression, can let forth their energy and anxiety, we could begin to socialize this kind of fundamentalist fervor and compete with the fundamentalist fervor. Now, I'm a naive architect, but the mayor thought that this was, you know, that they are really now going seriously after world-class architects to come to Turkey to build stadia that will be more than just watching a soccer match, but a place for, in a sense, an acculturation of the Arab street. And it was one small thought that how architecture can participate in the social and political process. Sure, we would love to participate, and architects would, in social housing, etc. There hasn't been an administration in this country that has been concerned with getting good social housing, since, I think, the 60s or the 70s. I think New Orleans would be a great time to say, hey, let's get the best architects around. Instead of designing perfume for Prada and jewelry for Tiffany, let them go down to New Orleans and build housing, right? And participate in some way. I think it's really important. I made a suggestion. I wrote a letter to the editor of the New York Times when we lost the Olympic bid, and supposedly all of that money that was going to go down the drain, public money to the tune of, I think it was $300 million. And I said, with $300 million, we could build 30 new schools in New York. And we could build great schools by great architects and have it be something that the city would be proud of. Paris, Vienna, Berlin, London have all brought great architects over to do projects in their cities. The Grand Projet of Mitterrand in Paris is one example. I go to Germany to do a Holocaust Memorial, one of the most important German projects that has happened in recent times, and I very rarely build in my own city. This is not a complaint. It's merely suggesting that we in this country don't care about public space. We don't care about how public space can help in the political and social process of bringing people together, because we have been and continue to be a country undermined by the media and by spectatorship. And I'm talking about, in the stadium, a different kind of spectatorship than sitting at home alone with a clicker and a TiVo, where time and space evaporate into a kind of handheld gadget. I want to talk a little bit now, before I show my slides, of the Berlin project, about the process of making something that was, I think, a very difficult project for Germany, and that is a memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. What they didn't do in Germany, and what they've been doing down at Ground Zero, is asking the victims what they wanted. We now ask people in our PC world that we're in what kind of news they want, who they want on the reality shows, etc. Had they asked the people of Germany if they wanted to give over 5 acres of central city Berlin to a Holocaust memorial, they would have lost 95 to 5. At least 95% of the Germans were against this facility. Helmut Kohl, in his sort of authoritarian manner, said, we're going to do this. And they invited 10 architects from all over the world to participate in an international competition to build. It's right next to the Brandenburg Gate. I'll show you in the pictures. And when I was first asked to do this, I was really very skeptical. I've been very skeptical about Holocaust, the Holocaust industry. I didn't like Schindler's List. I don't like Holocaust memorials because I think they can never equal the horror that was. In other words, they can only portray and represent in a rather sentimental and nostalgic way rather than true, what I would consider to be true memory. The second reason why I had a problem was I might have been called an apostate Jew, in the sense that I was never bar mitzvahed. We had Christmas trees in my house. I've married 2 non-Jewish women, and so being Jewish was something very strange to me. And also the fact that I had no relatives that were involved in the Holocaust. Nevertheless, I undertook to do this, and we won the competition. And we won only because Helmut Kohl, on his own, said, this is the one we're going to do. First of all, the jury picked 4 because he said he didn't want the jury to pick the one he was going to pick, and out of the 4, he picked our scheme. And when I met with Kohl, he's an enormous man. And we were, at the time, I give you a little vignette of working with him. I was working with the sculptor Richard Serra. And Richard Serra is the toughest sculptor, or one of the toughest human beings I know. He's not cowed by anybody. And Richard and I went in to have a 15-minute meeting with Helmut Kohl in his office, and Kohl was sitting over there, and his translator was here, I was here, Richard was next to me. And we thought we were there for 15 minutes. And Kohl talked for 2 hours about his relationship with what he called Judentum, Jewish culture. And then he looked at us and he said, but you know, Eisenman and Sarah, we've got to make a few changes in this project. You know, there are no parking spaces, there are no sidewalks, there are no places for buses. I mean, there's nothing practical about your project, and we're going to attract lots of tourists. And Richard Serra said, hey, wait a minute, Chancellor Kohl. And Kohl looked at him, and Serra said, listen, I've done memorials before. I did one in Washington, and the bureaucrats ruined it. And Kohl suddenly rose like a giant hooded cobra, right? He's a big man. And he said, Mr. Serra, he said, I am not a Washington bureaucrat. I am not an undersecretary or even a secretary. I'm a chancellor of the German Republic, and I will not be talked to like this. And he just blew Sarah out of the room. And 5 minutes later, Sarah quit, and we were off. And I tried to explain to Richard Serra the difference between a sculptor and an architect. A sculptor sits in his studio, he makes things. Either people buy them or they don't. Either they put them up or they take them down or whatever. But there's no communication. An architect, if the chancellor says, listen, Eisenman, you know, you designed me a house, but I have 2 Mercedes, there ain't no garage. You don't tell the client, I don't do garages, right? You do a garage, right? And that's what I try to tell Richard. You know, I mean, our project was very exciting, but we got to have sidewalks, right? Where do the buses come and where are the people going to park? And, you know, if there are no sidewalks and there are no benches and there are no trees. And Sarah couldn't deal with that. In any case, when Chancellor Kohl was not reelected, and in fact we had a conversation, I said, Chancellor Kohl, I think if Germany wins the World Cup that particular year, or it was the European Cup, I can't remember, 98, must have been European Cup, was the World Cup? We went. Anyway, I also follow European football. I said, I think you'll win the election. They lost miserably, and he lost the election to Gerhard Schroeder. Meanwhile, Gerhard Schroeder campaigned on his platform. One of the issues was not to build a memorial, okay? And so when Kohl lost, the memorial was dead. And so one thing led to another, and I met the culture minister for Gerhard Schroeder, and I showed him the project, and he said, you know, this is really an interesting project. We ought to do this. And he convinced Schroeder to do it, and suddenly the wheels, which had been the thing which had come off the tracks, was built. And it took 7 years, but last May it was dedicated. The most marvelous thing for me is to go to Berlin, and everybody was worried. The Jewish community didn't want this. They said it's going to cause anti-Semitism. The neo-Nazis didn't want it because it was, built on the sacred ground of Goebbels' bunker and Hindenburg's garden and all the central figures of Nazism. And so it was a very hot issue. Recently, 2 people Martin Walser, who was a very famous writer and critic, went on Vatican radio and he said, "Peter Eisenman, I was wrong to criticize your project. It's a great project, it's necessary, and it's really very moving." And another member of the German Academy, Georgi Konrad, from Budapest, also did the same thing after seeing what had happened with the memorial. Richard Serra even called me up and he said, "Peter, it's a great project. It's a cross between De Chirico, Kafka, and death." And what I thought was that everybody's going to treat it as a grim, solemn place. But instead, the Germans have overrun it. They play tag there. They jump from stone to stone. They make love there, as far as I've heard. And they've treated it with enormous respect, but as part of every day. And what I thought was interesting, if we could bring the Holocaust, the memory of the Holocaust, into everyday German, and say, you know, one German calls up another and says, "Let's go have lunch at the Holocaust Memorial," which they do, instead of in the Tiergarten across the street, that's something. That the notion of the Holocaust Memorial has become an everyday occurrence to the Germans. And to me, having it not a place of reverence, because how can you have a place of reverence commemorating an anti-reverent thing? I mean, you can have a Vietnam memorial, a World War II memorial, Korean memorial, all of these kinds of battle memorials, but how do you make a memorial against the very people who committed the crimes themselves? So therefore, it doesn't have to be a solemn place. And I think what's interesting is the Germans have sort of taken it over as their own. So much so, they've had so many people there that they expect about 1.5 million people this year alone. They've had to, their staff has been so overworked, they're now having to close one day a week because they don't have the funds to maintain the staff because of the number of people that are coming. Does that make something a success? For me, a level of acceptance of something like this is an enormous thrill. Just like, and I compare it to my stadium in Arizona, the fact that Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, can come and say, "This is the most fabulous stadium in the NFL." He was there a few weeks ago. The fact that Paul Tagliabue, the commissioner, can come and say, "This is going to set a new standard for NFL stadia," makes me feel that the average, everyday person is going to love going to the stadium, even though this team isn't too good. And like the average, everyday person in Germany loves going to the memorial. And they've sort of civilized the memorial into an everyday occurrence. And the stadium will do the same thing. It'll become, architecture will become part of an everyday occurrence, and people will go not only to see a football game, but to be in the place. And I think the being in the place is what is overcoming the spectatorship of the media. So I'm very optimistic that as the terror and destruction of the French Revolution brought about a whole new idea of society in Europe and government, I'm optimistic that the events of 9/11, when they settle in to the consciousness of this country, and it's much too early to know what that will be, will also bring about an optimistic era. I feel that way. I get up every morning and believing that I can participate in that optimism, and that's what I'm here today to share with you. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to show you some pictures of the. I'm not going to show the Arizona Stadium and all the other things because I'm not here selling things. I said I'm trying to get my son into college, so you know, see if the boss likes it. Anyway, we're going to show some pics. I'm supposed to push something here. This guy. Okay. Okay. This is, this is the Tiergarten in Berlin. I probably should have this is the Goethe Memorial. This is a great garden. The Brandenburg Gate would be about here, the symbol of Berlin. The Unter den Linden is here. The Reichstag would be up about where that hole is there, the Norman Foster glass dome. And this is the site. It's a 5-acre site. The American Embassy is right here. So we are right in the back door of the American Embassy. Joseph Goebbels' bunker, where he killed his children, is right here, right under, and still remains there. And Hindenburg's garden, the last elected sort of Chancellor, garden was right here. Hitler's bunker was right down here. So we are right in the middle of Nazism. We made a project. This is the original project. As you can see, there are no sidewalks. These are concrete pillars. There were 4,300 concrete pillars in the original project. They started at about 3 feet off the ground and went to 15 feet off the ground. These don't show very well on the screen, but these are two different topographies. One, a ground topography, which is over here, and a top of slab topography. They're both different. And what we did was to make an undulating ground so that what looks very innocent from the street, because it's only 3 or 4 feet above the height of the sidewalk, slopes down 7 or 8 feet radically deep so that you can be lost in space. And the whole idea was the potential for being lost in this space. Next, please. Oh, I'm next. Sorry. Technology. I got to put technology back. This is not my forte. Running. I don't do this. Just pat my tummy and turn things. Here you can see a better slide of the ground topography. And here the colored drawing shows you the heights of the pillars. The brown is 3 feet high. The green are 6 feet high. The purple are 9 feet high. The blue are 12 feet high. And the brown, this brown in the center, are 15 feet high. When I say high, not off the sidewalk, but from where you are in the sloping ground. One of the things that Chancellor Kohl insisted on, and the German Parliament voted on it into law, was there would be an underground place of memory where images from the Holocaust would be a room of silence, a room of names, a room of places. There were 4 rooms that were designated here. And so that you could walk without any sign or any idea of what you were looking at, or just being in a place here, and here would be the place of information. So we separated spectatorship from experience. Here was the spectatorship underground. The experience was here without any information, any mediation at all. Here was the first model of the ground that we made. You can see the undulating surface, and we stuck, these were wooden pegs that we put in here, and the first model, this was transformed into something like this. The whole notion for us was that it looked to be extremely rational, everything was lined up, but in fact when you put the pieces in, they began to slope, and we modeled the whole project on this not quite perfection. And the idea being that when reason is taken to an extreme, it becomes madness. And of course, the whole Nazi movement was reason taken to extreme into madness. And this is the warning for the 21st century, that do not believe too much in reason. The trees that Chancellor Cole insisted that we put into the memorial, the sidewalks, the places where people could gather. And you can see here in these sectional drawings how everything, if you're standing here on the street, you can look over the pillars, but as you get down in it, it becomes quite another experience, and it gets very deep and very claustrophobic. And it looks very innocent here in this model picture until you walk in it, and it's amazing when you're there to see people disappear into the space. And of course, as happens, if a mother lets go of the hand of her child, and we have film of a situation where a child lost her mother and started to scream because, and the minute you start to move, if both people move, they'll never find each other. They have to move to the perimeter because there are no signals as to where to be. And of course, the whole idea was modeled after a friend of mine's mother-in-law who went with her mother to Auschwitz in 1944 from Budapest, and she came up face-to-face with Dr. Mengele, who pushed her mother to one side, and she was dead in 2 hours. The daughter to the other side. The daughter said, "No, I want to go with my mother." And Mengele kicked her and said, "You'll have plenty of time to join your mother." And the daughter, now an older woman, said that the sense of being alone in space, the sense of silence that I felt, the inability to speak, being alone at Auschwitz, watching my mother go to her death, was an extraordinary experience. And of course, I couldn't capture that. It would have been mawkish and banal, as the Greeks couldn't capture this kind of expression in things. So I let the field be silent and allowed for a place in the city where one could walk in silence without too much expression. And here you can see the field of pillars. The Tiergarten over here. This is the construction of the future American embassy over here. And there's a picture of the actual field, and it looks like a rippling ocean. It looks very unthreatening. It's incredible with the light and how it changes in the shadows. All during the day, the field changes. And when it's rain on it, the pillars glisten. When there's snow on it, it looks amazingly malleable, let's say. And here you can see how it goes from something that's about 3 or 4 feet high, and you can see it slope down here till about 15 feet. And it gets pretty strange. And you're moving, as the Germans moved from the sidewalk innocently into chaos in their 1,000-year Reich. And here's a picture of the field from above. And again, from above, looking toward the Tiergarten over here, Potsdamer Platz, which is down here, one of the famous areas of Berlin. And you walk up this Ebertstrasse to the Brandenburg Gate and eventually to the American Embassy. And the field looking very serene. And then you see what it's like in the pillars and the field, the undulating ground, the shadows on the pillars, very much like the inside of a nave aisle in a cathedral. You get the sense of upward lifting and compression that you get in the side aisles of a cathedral. And here you can see this rolling nature of the field. And then from the other side, the pillars are not square purposely, so you get a different rhythm of being when you're walking along this way. You get the ends of the pillar in a more staccato rhythm, as opposed to when you're walking this way, you get the length of the pillars. And you can see in the photographs the real difference between the grain moving one way and the experience of one way and another. And there is a shot early evening, and what I love about this shot are some ghostly figures. It was taken with a time-lapse camera, and you get these ghostly images of people. And then you can see it at night, just at twilight, and then intermittently lit at night. We wanted some light, but not too much to give a sense of a kind of glowing in places that there are lights in the ground that reflect off of the pillars. And what happens is that people place flowers, they place stones, which is, again, a Jewish ritual, as if these were cemetery pieces. So there are all kinds of mementos that you find on the tops of these pillars. And one of the most moving images for me is taken looking north at the quadriga on the Brandenburg Gate, which is just, as I said, across the street, and then just across a few hundred meters, the Reichstag and the Norman Foster glass dome. And then we went and took some pictures with people in it and how people use it, and I think it's much better with people. I mean, it's a place that needs people, and the kinds of people that are there, kids walking and sort of enjoying themselves, as they do in churches when you're not certain of what they're supposed to be doing. Kids jumping, and sort of every day hanging out. And it's they're great street vendors now with selling ice cream and sausages and coffee, and they have about 4,000 visitors a day, which is quite extraordinary. A kid's bicycle, a jumper over here. And the last image I wanted to is one that we were lucky to get of somebody in motion. We never intended for these things to happen, but it's very interesting if you don't prescribe to people what they're supposed to do, how they begin to utilize architecture. And I think that's the wonderful thing, that these people come to express themselves in many ways. Some people come at dawn and want to be silent and walk. Some people come at dusk to be silent and to be alone. Some people come at night to sell drugs. Some people come school buses. You can't believe watching school buses stop and kids just rolling out of these buses and into this place. Thank God we don't have to go to a museum. Thank God, we don't have to go and learn anything. Thank God we can go and do something with our bodies. And the fact they go home and they say, "What did you do?" "We were at the Holocaust Memorial today. We had a great time," is the most amazing thing to hear from a German child for me. And what it does, and I think I want to close with this idea of how you can take something and reorient a political and social phenomenon. I used to go to Germany, and I've said this many times, I would leave as an American and I would come back as a Jew. The reason for that is that the Germans go out of their way to mea culpa in front of anybody that they perceive to have anything to do with being a Jew. and it makes you feel very uncomfortable. You feel like saying, hey, guys, why don't you just treat me as who I am, Peter Eisenman, right? And they can't. And somehow what this memorial has done is built a bridge to being normal about the experience of the Holocaust, to return the Holocaust into an everyday possibility. And I think that is a really important thing, because you cannot continue to incite guilt. And to never forget does not mean never forgive. And I think this memorial that the German people erected has something to do with an attempt to be forgiven. Thank you very much. I know many of you want to get out. I wouldn't be at a lecture like this on a Friday afternoon of football weekend when I was at school, but this guy, insisted that we do it. So I know I wouldn't have been at something like this. But if there are any questions, yes, I'll be very happy to. Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering, since you discussed stadia as community centers recently, we became very familiar with a stadium being sort of pressed into service against its nature in the Superdome as a community center, because there's no other place to put a great quantity of people. How you think that the use of the Superdome, the employment in that way, will influence stadium design in the future, or if it will, or how you think about it?
I think first of all, the Superdome is an antiquated facility. I think it's a great question, because what the new facilities are doing is providing, you cannot believe the sort of ratios of toilets, of concessions, of facilities for meetings. I mean, our stadium in Arizona is a rollout field, a rollout roof. It's air-conditioned sometimes. You can see the Arizona landscape sometimes. It can be used for a convention center, for rock and roll concerts. And it can be a facility because it's built to withstand earthquakes. And we tested this thing for whatever. Winds of 130 miles per hour, sort of 100-year winds, 100-year floods. What you would find is that if you moved into our stadium, the same people that moved in to the Superdome, we have all the emergency generators. I mean, the kinds of technology since the Superdome was built, the kinds of facilities for taking care of sick people and having privacy have changed enormously. And I think what has happened is that the stadia have become community facilities, and the Superdome was not. But I would suggest that many of the new generation of NFL stadia have become community facilities. They're almost like shopping malls. And they basically are shopping malls with a large seating capacity, large capacity to handle large numbers of people. I would have thought that, for example, in case of really radical emergency, that, terrorist attack, the people wouldn't be leaving Houston like they are. They would be going to a facility where they could be certain that there would be emergency power, private facilities, etc. We have, all of these stadia now have over 200 private suites and lounges for, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people. Now, that's not a lot when you're talking about a great emergency, but I think that this is also going to raise a red flag as to what do we do instead of getting in our cars when there's an emergency. Maybe we go to places of shelter where we know that there can be this kind of provision. So I truly believe that Katrina will wake some people up to thinking, maybe we don't need to run, but maybe we go to places that can really provide shelter. Yes.
I'm already here at the microphone. You spoke of the Hamilton and Jeffersonian antithesis, we'll call it. I wonder if you have a Madisonian synthesis for growing cities which are both hostile to people coming in and inconvenient to get to, and yet are also important to the future of civilized society.
I think that's one of the great questions. What does one do? I made the great mistake when I was in Tulsa, which I've got to be very careful what one says in any place one is, that I said that Tulsa was a giant parking lot for churches. That is a really dumb thing to say. Okay? That's my lack of political sensibility, right? It appeared to me that Tulsa was a giant parking lot for an enormous number of churches that were filled one day a week and then the place emptied out. And what I said Tulsa needed to do, because we were working on a plan for downtown Tulsa, Tulsa needed to contract because the downtown was no longer alive, and what was alive were the shopping malls in the suburbs. Now, I think it was Bill Gates recently, 6 months ago, said the shopping mall is dead. The notion of the new shopping mall, that we're going to return to the cities. Now, I think the cities, and I'm not speaking about present company, but I've gone across America, and most of take Phoenix, for example. There's a place that's much too big in its downtown for what happens there. Nothing happens in downtown Phoenix. And so I don't think the cities need to expand. I think we need to contract. And we need to try and bring what that energy that brought people to the suburbs, that is Jefferson, needs to be brought in to Hamilton in some way. We need to find a way to get that spirit. And for me, I love New York. Why? Because I do have Jefferson. I can live in a small brownstone. I have all the shops within walking distance. I don't need to use a car. The guy in the liquor store knows me. The butcher shop knows me. The newspaper guy knows me. The cleaner knows me. Everybody knows me. And then know other people too. And I live in a suburb in the middle of New York City, basically. I don't have to go anywhere. If I want to go out to dinner, there's a Chinese restaurant, a Japanese restaurant. Everything is right there. And so I think it's possible that we can make this kind of compromise and bring Jeffersonian elements back into those stripped-out cities. Look at St. Louis, a bombed-out city. Tulsa, Phoenix. How many cities are just, shells, and they're dead at night? And to me, that is the really serious problem, that there isn't a 24/7 idea of many American cities that were wonderfully alive places have been turned into shells. And so I think we need a vision of I use implosion, to contract rather than expand, and by contracting to expand. I think we can no longer afford to have 3- and 4-car families because gas prices are going up. A guy who works in McDonald's can't afford $5 a gallon of gas to get from where he or she lives to the salary he's getting, or she. And so, to me, we're going to be forced to rethink the car, public transport, infrastructure, and how we live. I think every American should be able to live in an individual house, but I don't think you have to have 3 cars to do it. And I think we've got to have a better, infrastructure, public school system, public transit system, community facilities for daycare, because we all have working mothers and fathers now. So I think we have to, and I think 9/11 has caused us, and the rising cost of maintaining the lifestyle that we had before, we need to rethink how we use it's not that we don't have enough land. I mean, all you got to do is drive across America, which I just did. We got plenty land. It's, how can we afford to use it in a reasonable way, in a sustainable way, in a way that preserves the natural resources and also allows for people to maintain a lifestyle without driving energy economies and other things, out the window. And I'm standing here and you say to me, that sounds good, what would you do? If I knew what to do, I wouldn't be a football fan. I'd be doing it. What Gordon understands is that I have no answers either. I'm just throwing out ideas, and that's what I do as a teacher. I don't tell students what to do because I don't know what to do. But I certainly know what not to do. And I don't think we need to keep expanding our highway systems. I think we got to have better mass transit. We got to have better energy efficient in so many different ways. And I don't know how people can afford 3-car families. And, if you have a teenager and you live in a suburb and you got mommy, daddy, and the teenager all with cars, that's an expensive, proposition. And I don't own a car, and I don't hope to own a car. Couldn't afford it. So we'll see. Yes?
You've been described as a B-grade architect.
A B-grade?
B-grade architect. And the only reason I mention this is that the person who said this about you is yourself in an interview. And of course, I was astonished that anyone would say that.
I can tell you what I meant, but go ahead.
But I was wondering who you think of who you admire as a sort of A-grade architect and what it is about them that you admire.
Let me tell you what I mean by B-grade. I hire B students, right? Because and I hire athletes, both, right? I had the center on the Cornell football team, and, too bad Vanderbilt doesn't have architecture because they'd be great for my office. I had the center on the Cornell football team in my office this summer. This kid was great. He's what I call a B student because many athletes are not A students, right? But he has a B mentality. He's a team player. He's not I, right? And I like to think of myself as a team player. I played team sports. And I run my office like a team. We had the best softball team in New York for many years, and people hated us. Well, of course, I brought in ringers who were baseball players who happened to be I had the catcher from the Ohio State team. He doesn't know this, but the catcher for the Ohio State team, I used to fly in to play softball with us because he was an architect. Anyway, I think being a B person allows you to work in a team, not to think of yourself always, but to think of yourself in relationship to others. I know a lot of, I think you have to be a type A architect to get up here in front of a lot of people. But I think I'm a type B when it comes to the relationship I have with some of my colleagues. They'll go nameless, but you could find them on any number of websites, who demand certain things from their clients, demand certain things from their lives and what they do. I mean, I know architects who get people fired from newspapers for writing critical articles about them. I just had a big article in the New York Times of what I would consider a critical article, and I said, the last thing I said, it was about the renovation of the Wexner Center, which Gordon knows about. They're reopening the Wexner Center. It had leaks. And the person asked me, so what do you think about this? And the last thing I said was, the Wexner Center has less deficiencies than I do. And I truly believe that. And if you go through life thinking that you are B, not C, because then you're nowhere, right? But that you're not A, I think it's a more healthy view of life. I hate A students, right? Because they make me feel even like a C person, right? So I was never an A student, I got to tell you. And I have an office. I'm a B guy. So what can I tell you?
So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on the role of minimal architecture in this calling for to remove people from the role of spectatorship?
Well, I'm very much interested in minimal architecture. I'm interested in minimal sculpture. I'm interested in minimal art. What that means is, how do you have minimal sculpture or architecture and have it sensuous and be something that the body experiences? And that's something we're working on. I mean, if you go to Berlin, it looks like minimal, but when you're there and you feel the space and the concrete, it ain't minimal. And the most wonderful thrill that I had in Berlin was to see a blind person in the field, and he could see more because there's nothing to see there by touching the pillars. And he was touching every pillar. He could feel the cold when they were in shadow, the heat when they were in sunlight, and they do radiate heat and cold. He could feel the surface, and it was amazing to watch him touch the pillars, and you could see him radiating a certain sense of being there. To me, that's both minimal and what I call sensual, and I think that's what's important. The boss is going to grab me.
Ladies and gentlemen, give Peter a round of applause.
And I'm rooting for you guys tomorrow. You know that.
Well, he says he's rooting for us tomorrow. Let me tell you something. You're not getting in unless you do. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who want to have a chance to meet Mr. Eisenman and spend a few minutes with him, our reception is right around the corner, and he'll be there for a few more minutes. Thank you all for coming.
Yep. Thanks.